Welcome to DU Digimon.
Hello and welcome to DU Digimon and welcome to another video. If you're liking this sort of content, please make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel and ding that notification bell so you're not missing out on the latest content. Now, this is the follow-up video to our tier list video from last week. The vote is now concluded. 296 people took part in this poll, which is the most people we've ever had on any single poll, which is crazy. Were they all logged in? No, but only around about 50 or so, I think, were actually logged in. So, you know, give or take. But, you know, I think this is still really cool to see so many people partaking in this, even if they weren't all logged in and their votes didn't count. But it's all a bit of fun at the end of the day. Now, obviously, for anyone watching this video, if there's anything I've learned, being a fledgling YouTuber, is anything with a list in the title can bring about certain feelings in people, certain negative feelings, ban list ones, tier list ones, because people don't want their cards being here, or people don't want their decks being talked shit about. Well, you can't blame me. These are not my votes. My votes are here. These are not my votes. These are the votes of the people. The people have spoken, and I think for the whole, they're fairly accurate. Are they entirely accurate, in my opinion? Probably not. But that's just my opinion. You know, not me to judge. This is the vote at the end of the day, the voting process. We all have different opinions and all have different things to say. So let's get a start on with Tier 1. The deck with the most Tier 1 votes was actually Gallantmon, which is kind of nuts. I mean, this is a stacked lineup. Gallantmon, I don't think statistically had the most kind of big tournament wins. I think that still goes to Royal Knights. But Gallantmon, yeah, it got the most tier 1 votes with 40 here, which is crazy. You know, so pretty darn good going there. I'm going to try and go through these quickly, guys, because I am actually filming this on my lunch break. So I'm hoping I can get this done as quickly as possible. Also, something else to kind of mention on this one is I had a really interesting comment with the tier list video last week where I was just kind of doing my votes. Which is whether or not I need to actually start doing a little bit more metadata analysis when I'm doing these sort of tier lists to not only, you know, bolster my own opinions, but to also kind of inform and kind of give out that information to other people. Now, I, for one, have not always been very good when it comes to data analysis. It's not really my thing. But if it is something that you guys would like to see, I will suck that up and I will do it, or at least give it a go, you know, and see what we could do. I mean, AI is now a thing. You know, we can use AI for a lot of different things with these kind of things. You know, so hopefully I can try and do something like that maybe to make it a bit easier. But, you know, if you guys want a bit more kind of strict data analysis, bearing in mind that having that data analysis could also sway people on how they vote. You know, whether that be for better or worse, I don't know. But, you know, I think that it could definitely kind of help, you know, in terms of showing the accuracy of the tier lists rather than anything else. So if you guys want to see a little bit more data analysis from us, then let me know and I will get that sorted. But anyways, continuing on, next deck, Sakuya Tribal. Yeah, I completely agreed, this one being in tier 1 as well. It is the best yellow deck of the format. Obviously we've got the ban list coming this weekend as well, so any of these decks could potentially shift in terms of their placement on the tier list by the end of the BT22 format. But as of right now, I definitely agree with all of these. Royal Knights, as I mentioned, I think statistically, someone do feel free to you know, correct me in the comments. I think Royal Knights is still statistically the best deck of the previous couple of formats. And thus statistically one of the best decks right now. I don't know for sure, because there are decks which I think are now giving Royal Knights trouble. For example, stuff like the gas deck. You know, I think Royal Knights is going to lose out to that on most occasions because of how quick that deck is. But Royal Knights is still super spicky for the majority of the meta. Megidramon, which of course I used Megidramon as the icon here, and ironically Megidramon is not really even played in there. It's kind of more like Purple Gallantmon. Yeah, was absolutely the menace of the BT21 format. We've seen a drop off on it, but it's still very much in tier 1. Very, very good. In the same vein, the Geamon version of Birds has been really, really good. if this engine does not get hit, I need to actually finally get around to building this myself. I've been so distracted with other things that Birds, one of my favourite decks of all time, has kind of been pushed to the wayside, and I really do want to give it a go. The CS version of Omnimon has gone into Tier 1, whereas the red-based version of it is in Tier 1.5. And I can see why, because this version does have a little bit more kind of synergy with the Nokia, kind of churning that out. By turn 2 you can go up into your Omnimon so long as you've got the right setup. It's got a little bit more draw, it's got a little bit more search using some of the older EX4 searchers. Definitely really good, and kind of the way I'm playing it at the moment on DCGO, and I do need to get around to actually sleeving the real version. Then there's this one, which is Omnimon Ultra S, which I think people may have confused either with the newer one, or with the gas deck. I should have really named gas on this, but admittedly, I was halfway, when I did the last tier list video, I was between holidays, essentially. I'd just come back from one holiday, I was then going on another holiday, taking a break, and I had not kept up with certain scenes and stuff like that. So, the gas deck kind of completely flew by me, and the potency of that deck, I think, is incredibly good. Obviously, this is the old EX4 Omnimon Ultra S, and I probably should have put like EX4 engine on this or something like that, because my original intention was for this to be the EX4 Omnimon Ultra S, which I think has, feasibly gotten a lot better since the support in EX9. But likewise, if you consider this as gas is absolutely tier 1, I would say. Obviously, I have not put it on here because I was between holidays and kind of just hadn't paid attention to it. On here. And then the DM version 1.2 deck ended up in tier 1, which technically it's a joint between tier 1 and tier 2, which is interesting. I think because some people saw Omnimon Ultra S and put it in tier 1, and other people saw DM version 1.2 and put it in tier 2. I think, again, that could be a confusion thing on my part. Maybe some further clarification. I know Dan in the team has kind of mentioned about kind of maybe trying to get some further clarification on these. I was kind of strapped for time, so I didn't get a lot of time to adjust some of these images, so I think I definitely need to try and do that a bit better next time. But this one is definitely a split vote on this one. I think because of the image and because of the actual title of the deck here, so maybe I need to use a different image next time. Next, we move on to Tier 1.5. Red, Purple, Imperial Digimon. Yeah, this is squarely in Tier 1.5. I mean, look at the amount of votes for Tier 1.5. Not really been seen a lot, but I think it is still pretty good. And it's right next to its blue-green Imperial brother, which some people still wanted to put in Tier 1, but the majority of people put in Tier 1.5. I mean, it's still doing a lot of results. I know I watched, I think it's Zenitsu's kind of ban list predictions video the other day, and it's still in the top 5 most used decks somehow. Like, I genuinely haven't seen it a lot myself, but it's still in the top 5 decks, which is crazy. But it hasn't put as many results in. It's not, I think 9 times out of 10 it will probably end up losing to a lot of these decks in tier 1, but it also is going to still do the business against them. 9 times out of 10 I think might be a bit too strict, actually. Probably more like 6 out of 10, I would say. These ones going, or maybe, I don't know. But my general thoughts on it is, yeah, I think tier 1.5. Blue Armor as well. Again, I think this is a tier 1.5er, and the majority of people did agree with that. I think Blue Armor is still really good. Mangamon X is still very hard to deal with. Most people obviously are playing more of this kind of rush style of armor now, and there are just ways of dealing with that now. Then Adventure is in 1.5. Adventure is interesting because I think a lot of people have made the point of, if the ban list doesn't hit Adventure, Adventure will just swing up to tier 1 all of a sudden. And, in my testing, Adventure still is good, but it is slower than a lot of the stuff in true tier 1. It requires a bit more setup. It's, if anything, the version of Adventure that I play has kind of been proven to be worse than Gas. I think Gas is kind of the way of doing that Sagittarius kind of BS into Omnimon Ultra S. Whereas, most people are playing kind of like Green Vortex Adventure or kind of more kind of classic aggro Adventure. But, Adventure could be a void filler if any of these tier 1 decks get hit on the ban list. Leviamon is still in tier 1.5, and I think that's pretty interesting. The next amount of votes was for tier 2. I think Leviamon can still absolutely put in the work. And remember, of course, all three of these top tiers are truly meta-viable tiers for the most part. You know, all of them have got some sort of meta value and can do really well, or have had some form of results. Not all of them. There are decks in the lower tiers that have also had results, and we'll get into those. But yeah, Leviamon's still great. Purple Hybrid as well has still been putting in work despite the last ban list. You know, I think it's still very, very quick. Then there's Puppets. Puppets, I was almost surprised didn't end up in tier 1, honestly. I mean, it's kind of one of those decks that when it gets the ball rolling, if you don't have something like Digivolve, you're screwed because you can't do anything against it. But I suppose it is piece dependent, so it's there. Then the normal version of Birds ended up in tier 1.5, nearly into tier 1. And I can definitely see why. You know, it doesn't have as much memory gain as the Guillemon Birds version. You know, so as much as I love it, I kind of agree with it being there. The red base of a version of Omnimon, as kind of mentioned earlier. The CS base version just has, in general, better synergies than this one. Still completely viable, still can be completely good. Just any other version of Omnimon is great. Then there's Galaxy, which very nearly edged into tier 1, and personally for me, I think it is still a tier 1 kind of deck, especially with the new support, especially with some of the more disgusting shenanigans it can get up to. For example, the infinite Leopardmon loop it can now do. But again, this one is a very piece dependent. I think what separates a lot of the tier 1 decks from a lot of the tier 1.5s is that the tier 1.5s require much more setup, whereas tier 1 requires less specific setup and less work, ultimately kind of building up into a quicker kind of way of doing things. Or they just have ways of being able to cheat things out more or be more efficient, or that's the real dividing thing. A lot of these decks, Adventure, Galaxy, these require more specific ways of setup, whereas these need like 1 or 2 cards to really get going. Right, now we're going to go into tier 2. 3 Great Angels, yeah, I can see that being in tier 2. This one can adopt kind of certain things like Mastomon bits and stuff like that. Yeah, I know it's done some, I think it won an Evo Cup fairly recently, from what I remember. So yeah, I can see that. Lord Knight Purple Base still in tier 2. The Dark Animal engine still being pretty good, but obviously we've not really seen it anywhere. You know, so yeah, I think still tier 2. I don't think it's a rogue tier deck. I think it's still fairly potent. But yeah, that's there. Then DM Machine Dramon, which kind of also the normal Machine Dramon falls under, Gear Machine Dramon as well. All of those would be tier 2. They've not really done as much on the meta as people were hoping it would when it came out in EX9, but it's definitely the best or one of the better decks from EX9. Not entirely, obviously Gas is saying that Gas is probably the best single EX9 deck, you know, using all of the older support and just sprinkling in some of the newer EX9 stuff. But in terms of a deck that uses majority of EX9 stuff, I think DM Machine's one of the best. Vortex Warriors, yeah, tier 2, even if it plays Medieval Galamon at 4 copies, it's still tier 2. You know, Medieval Galamon is fantastic and does a lot of the carrying in Vortex Warriors. But you know, Vortex has also shown it can be just a really good top end, you know, when you pair it with Adventure. So not bad at all. Hunters, yeah, I would say tier 2, squarely agree with the votes here. You know, it has got some really good things going for it, but again, you know, requires quite a bit of setup, requires quite a few different things going on. Ancient Garurumon is tier 2 now, according to our votes. Again, not one that's done a lot of work. I think when it does appear, it does really well, but it needs the right pilot to really get it going. 7 Demon Lords in tier 2. This one, again, kind of falls into that category of needing too much setup and being too slow for a lot of the meta. You know, Gas could kill 7 Demon Lords on, like, turn 2 if it wanted to, and if it got the right pieces. So, yeah, definitely agree with that. Diaboromon made its way into tier 2 with the new support. Yeah, I can see that. It's super aggro, can go super wide. Again, requires quite a bit of setup. Jesmon in tier 2. This one can be absolutely diabolical once it gets to its final board, but it has to get there, so I completely understand it being in tier 2. The OG Alphamon deck, still the better Alphamon deck, at least in terms of the votes here. The Uranus one, Uranus? Arenus. I don't know, this is fucking sad, man. But either way, this one ended up in Rogue and this one ended up in tier 2, so completely see that. Hero jumped up massively. I remember when we did our last tier list, Hero was like a jank, but now because people have managed to get results using the link stuff, yeah, jumped up to tier 2, and I can see that. You know, it had some regional results in BT21, so yeah, I can see that for definite. Gear Machine we've kind of already touched. Galacticmon, still one of the best black decks that there is. Very immovable. It's one of those decks I always just have problems with. It's a kryptonite deck for me, because I always just seem to be playing the deck that can't get it out of there quick enough, and then it gets into Galacticmon and it's like, oh cool, yeah, I'm going to play the option and I'm going to trash 4 of your security, lol 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 lol. Oh, check, oh look, and I've got a little Venmon out. Oh, you're dead. You know, so it's always kind of spooky. Shine Grey, still tier 2, and according to the voters, the single best Greymon deck, because you'll notice in tier 2 there are no other Greymon decks, guys. They've all fallen down to the lower tiers, which I find crazy, especially in some cases. But yeah, Shine Greymon is there. A Badamon in tier 2. This one kind of had a bit more of a range of votes by the looks of it. And, you know, I think a Badamon is up there with Galacticmon as being the best black deck right now. Kind of a toss-up between them two, if I'm honest. Red Hybrid, yeah, can still put in work. I could definitely see that. Has fallen out of graces a little bit, but tier 2 is still very respectable. Arenus, so this has jumped up to tier 2. Obviously, this is a newer BT22 deck and hasn't really made that much of a splash just yet. But yeah, tier 2 I think is completely respectable with it, especially with this new support. Tyrannymon as well is in tier 2. I think you could make an argument for Tyrannymon being rogue tier because it's not really made, you know, as big of a, what's a dinosaur related pun? Stomp on the meta. But you know, I personally think it's, from my own testing, I think it's slept on. I think it's better than people think. And clearly the votes think that too, although very split between tier 2 and rogue tier. You know, Allforce, I would agree with tier 2. I think a lot of people were hyped to see new Allforce support because back in BT11 people loved that deck, but it requires a shit ton of setup. So yeah, I can agree with the results here. Chaosmon Axel, I love this deck, and a fair few people even voted it into Jank tier, but tier 2 it shall remain according to the voters. Then Seadramon, so the Giga Seadramon deck, majority of people put this in tier 2, very split across the board. I also kind of forget that there is a skip tool on these votes as well, so that might be why sometimes the votes are kind of all over the place. But yeah, tier 2, I completely respect that. It's way scarier, you know, in principle. I think sometimes it can just do away with you very quickly if it gets the right kind of setup and the right draw. But yeah, I think that's respectable. Crossheart, again, tier 2. If it gets to its end board, it's really good, but it's just a little bit too slow compared to a lot of other things. And then there's CS, and CS just about missed out being in tier 1.5. If we did it on an average vote system, it might have ended up higher, might have ended up lower, I don't know. But CS is interesting. I think CS, a lot of people call it the fair version of Galaxy, and I think that is a fair way of calling it. But you know, it's very glass cannon, because if it doesn't, you know, Alphamon can do 4 checks in 1 turn, easy, great. But if you don't survive to then, you know, with your Kyoko setups and stuff like that, you know, like you need that Kyoko setup so that when your Alphamon does die, you can just grab it back, then unsuspend and go into it on the next turn, do your 2 checks. But it is very glass cannon. That is kind of the issue with it. Super efficient, but not efficient enough to close out games necessarily all the time. Then we jump into Rogue tier, and this is where things get quite interesting. There's actually a deck I'm going to skip to, which is Mastemon. Mastemon has had some results, but the majority of people still put it into Rogue tier. Very nearly went into tier 2. I wouldn't call it a tier 1.5 deck or anything like that. I don't think it's done well enough to do that. And the thing that I find with Mastemon, at least from what I've seen a lot of the deck lists, a lot of the Mastamon decks are kind of more leaning into Three Great Angels territory, and the purer ones are the ones that are doing worse off of the two. That could just be my observations. I could be very wrong on that. But I think I agree with Mastamon being in Rogue tier. Reason I jumped to it is someone mentioned it in the comments on the last video, and they themselves are topped with it. And I think as a general compromise between their opinion and mine, I think potentially this could have been a tier 2 deck, but the votes said Rogue tier. Then we're going to go back to the beginning. So looking at all of these different Greymon decks, Gaiomon ended up in Rogue tier quite squarely. Something also to obviously say is obviously these tier lists also dictate what things we play in our Jank Tank series, which whilst you're watching this video, we'll actually be midway through playing Jank Tank 10. And I'd be very tempted to play Gaiomon in that. I mean, I kind of want to play a true Jank Tank. Jank deck, sorry. But I'd be very tempted to play Gaiomon in it. I've not technically submitted my list yet, so there's still time. But yeah, Gaiomon, I think, is so close to being better. But again, it requires that setup. It requires a lot of stuff going for it. But yeah, I can see why a majority of people would put it in Rogue tier. Then Deep Savers, which along with Nature Spirits and Nightmare Soldiers, which I should have taken off of here really, because it did win a previous one, as well as Wind Guardians, all of them have ended up in Rogue tier. I think it's because when they get to their end boards, they all do really good stuff, but they have to get there. They require a lot of pieces, DNA problems, and the thing with the DNA decks is unless the deck is really, really good and has a really efficient engine, DNA decks tend to fall off because they require so much work to go up into. And clearly that's denoted in the votes here, with Deep Savers, Wind Guardians, Nightmare Soldiers, and NSP. All of them ended up in Rogue tier. Necromons ended up in Rogue tier as well. Big chunk of the votes gone to Rogue tier on this one. Again, I think this one can really be hyper aggressive when it gets going, but it's also it's kind of got the worst problems of purple sometimes, where it can over trash, it can over delete, it can kind of deplete its own board presence a little bit too much. And if you don't replenish yourself once you want to really get going, it can struggle. Lilithmon X is in Rogue tier still, which is interesting because I think Millith has dropped down to Jank, I think. So Lilith is pretty cool. We, men of culture love this deck. But I can see why this is in here, because again, this one does have kind of the mediocre purple issues where it can just deplenish its own resources and just not do enough with those. Black War Greymon OTK is in Rogue tier. This is a deck I really need to start experimenting with again, because I love it to pieces. It was the first big deck profile on this channel. I think I'd say big for at the time, I suppose. But yeah, I can see why this is in Rogue tier. A lot of people have also voted into Jank tier as well. Requires so much setup to get going. D-Brigade, again, this one can do really well in the early game, but it struggles sometimes to close things out, so I can see why it's ended up in Rogue tier. Personally, I think it can go wide enough that you could make an argument for it being tier 2, but again, where are the results for it? So there you go. Dorbic. Now, this actually did have a topping result at a regional fairly recently, but again, the thing with Rogue tier decks, yes, they are legal for Jank Tank. These are still decks which, so in terms of a general disparity, tier 1, tier 1.5, and tier 2 are decks you could see comfortably within meta. Obviously, on a scaling spectrum, tier 1 being more frequent and so on. Rogue tier decks, I think, are decks that can do really well in certain metas. They're ones that won't really come up a lot that much until certain metas allow them to be strong enough. And Dorbic could be one of those decks, Same with stuff like, I'm pretty sure Dragon Lynx is in here. Yep, stuff like Dragon Lynx as well. Because Dragon Lynx is, I've seen this do well. I've seen it won a regional. Again, shout out to Bone Duster. D-Lynx did really well because of the fact that stuff like Royal Knights struggles with massive floodgate decks, and that's what D-Lynx is. Obviously also bearing in mind, we take a certain staples into account, the medieval Galamons and blah 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 blah. But you know, Rogue Tier I think is generally decks that can do well in certain situations and certain metas. Then we've got the mineral deck. This one can just obliterate you if it gets all of its kind of stack pieces there, and you get your closest on board. We've got Legend Arms. Again, this one does have kind of DNA issues. If it gets to where it's going, it's fantastic, but if it doesn't, it kind of falls off. Lepon. Now, Lepon, of course, is absolutely insane inside the Galaxy list, but I kind of agree with it being here, even after experimenting with a few different engines myself. You know, I think, again, because it's not really like an archetypal card, it loses out on having those archetypal engines. So, you know, it's a fantastic card, Lepon Ace, and, you know, Lepon X is a fantastic card and all this sort of stuff, but they just lose out on having a true deck of their own. Yeah, you've technically still got the BT13 stuff that you could use, the Salamon and all that kind of stuff, but that's from almost 10 sets ago now. You know, so... Then there's Bunnies. Bunnies was a big surprise for me going into Rogue Tier, and I'm fairly sure, I think Charles is looking to play this in Jank Tank 10. We will see when everyone submitted the lists and everything. But, yeah, Rogue Tier is spooky for Bunnies. You know, I would have still kind of thought Tier 2-ish, but you know, it's clearly not putting results. So people have voted it down into Rogue Tier. Absolutely fine with that. You know, but it is going to be a spooky deck in terms of Jank Tank. Then we've got the Alpha Chronicle build. The Chronicle engine I freaking love, so I'm kind of surprised to see this here. You know, I think this can really, you know, get going and really just, you know, the top end on this deck can be so variable. We've seen people play Gigaseedramon. I've experimented with using Galamon X in it. You know, it's a really cool engine. So yeah, kind of surprised to see it here. Not gonna lie. Blackwall Greymon ended up in Rogue Tier, almost ended in Jank Tier, 24 to 23. That is crazy for what was a deck in its heyday, the best deck of the format. Obviously that was BT11, BT12, long time ago. Things change, power creep happens, far too slow now. You know, but I think, you know, in the Rogue Tier context, could be really good. Obviously, you know, I'll be midway through playing Jank Tank 10, but you know, if comment below if you want to tell me what I should have played in Jank Tank 10, because I'll already be playing what I pick. Then we've already talked about D-Links. Dex Doru is kind of spooky in Rogue Tier as well. Again, not really put in the results, so I can completely see why it's ended up in Rogue Tier. Yeah, fair play. Lucemon, I hate this deck. I hate this deck. It's so obnoxious. It's such an obnoxious deck. So I hate the fact it's in Rogue Tier because it's technically Jank legal. And that means Dan could play it. I don't think he is for Jank Tank 10. But, oh God, I hate Lucemon. It's such an frankly obnoxious deck. I just don't like it. And if you do like it, fair enough. I don't. Then, what else have we got? Night Massages, we talked about. Eaters. Obviously a new deck from BT22. This one, once it gets to its end board, could just completely switch, you know, shut off everything. And against certain decks, it really hurts them as well. Because, you know, it does the, when something would leave, I take this and stuff like that. So, it can fizzle a lot of things with those Eaters effects, essentially. But, yeah, Eaters, I think, again, is one of those decks that just relies so much on setup, and it's kind of like a fusion of, what was it? A kind of fusion of Royal Knights and Reaper. It's kind of like a mix of those two, but it's just not. It's kind of very clearly more towards the Reaper way of doing things. Not as bad as that, but you know. Blue Flares ended up in Rogue Tier. Again, I remember when this was an absolute scourge. BT10, BT11 format. Even going up all the way to BT13 was still really good. But now, BT22, people have voted it into Rogue Tier. Completely fair play. Examon's ended up in Rogue Tier. This, against certain decks, is really good. I know I got absolutely smashed by this in a game one of a match I did against it with Birds. Luckily, I pulled it back in the remaining two games, but it absolutely smashed me in game one, and can absolutely do the business. Your name again, Arenus. Arenus. This guy, Mon. Feel free to let me know the pronunciation below, guys. This one has a lot of tricks, but it's just not as aggro efficient and defensively efficient as the Atmon deck. Doesn't really have protection from what I remember. You can obviously take it in from the Atmon stuff, but then you lose your App Fusions, you know, so there's that. Bloomlord has ended up in Rogue tier, which again, man, this used to be such a scourge of a deck. Really, really good. But now, obviously fallen off. It can make advantage of a lot of generic green stuff, but green in general has not been doing well over the last few formats, and clearly the votes reflect that. Cherubi, again, another one which has fallen down, or very nearly ended up in Jank tier. Obviously it shares a lot of things with the Bunnies deck, but obviously it has a kind of slightly different engine in the fact that it's more Lopmon focused than it is Terrier focused. You know, it can go incredibly wide if it gets going, but again, got to get there. Mastomon we've already talked about, Nature Spirit's already talked about. The Alphamon Classic build has ended up in Rogue tier. In fact, it's a tie between Rogue tier and Jank tier, which is nuts. I mean, this is Alphamon, one of the strongest Royal Knights. How is he this low? You know, especially with some new support, which you can make use of with the new Alphamon. But I guess, again, this is a question of setup. All of these decks have this thing in common where setup is the problem, and this is no different. Bezamon, another deck that's ended up in Rogue tier, almost ended up in tier 2. Come EX10, I think this will jump way back up again. The EX10 support is looking really cool. You know, so I think it could end up back up there again. But as of now, people have voted it down to Rogue tier, so it's legal for Jank Tank, and that's scary because of how memory efficient it can be. Greymon Toolbox has also ended up in Rogue tier. Again, this used to be a really good deck, and obviously has a lot of different tools because Greymon is such a vast archetype, sometimes too vast when it comes to deck building, and it's not the best way of playing Greymon. In fact, I'm going to talk about the best way of playing Greymon, at least in my opinion, which is the War Greymon OTK, which has ended up in Rogue tier, along with Metal Garurumon, and Alex will be happy by that. I need to tell him that Metal Garurumon has actually ended up in Rogue tier. But War Greymon OTK, I mean, holy crap. This is such a strong OTK when it gets going. I've said when it gets going so much in this video. I do apologize, guys. You know, because it does 5 checks, turbos into Omni-1X, end of turn, that's it, you're gone. So the fact that this has ended up in Rogue tier, damn. Zed Millennium Mon, very nearly ended up in Jank tier. Again, this is a deck where once it gets to its top end, it can be really difficult to deal with. I did some testing last night and ended up coming across this with the deck that I'm looking to play in Jank Tank. And if I come across this deck in Jank Tank, I'm going to be scared after last night. That's all I'll say. Bugs, Tyrant, ended up in Rogue tier. And that, again, this is such an immovable force when it gets to its full board. You know, the Tyrant's really hard to remove. You've got the redirects. You know, it's constantly bottom decking stuff. You know, like this is nuts. This is nuts. It shows the power creep. I mean, this is a deck that you know, obviously it wasn't the best deck when it first came out, but it's always been pretty, you know, not necessarily potent in terms of results, but in terms of certain metas and certain matchups, it was always kind of spooky. So to see it here, crazy. Gamamon has ended up in Rogue tier, almost ended up in tier 2. The new support from this from BT21 and BT22 has really helped the deck, but clearly not enough to help it climb from Rogue tier. Kentorusmon, I love this deck to bits. It is so fun. It's a complete roller coaster because you're just chipping away at your own security, building up as much advantage as you can, and you just pray that you're going wide enough and they can't deal with your board. You know, and if they can't deal with your board, it's really good, and this very well could be a deck I play in Jank Tank 10. You know, I love it so friggin' much. But yeah, fantastic. Then the black base version of Lord Knight has ended up here. The purple base still squarely in tier 2. The black base version is now Rogue tier. So this is all of your Skull Knightmon stuff. This is all of that. The new Rie support. Yeah, nuts. Very nearly in Jank tier as well. Then there's Melga, which has just avoided being in tier 2 and has fallen down into Rogue. And I think this is this has got to be classic Melga, right? Right? Not Gas. Gas up here. Melga, no. Melga, this is not the same thing. But this has ended up in Rogue tier, which is again spooky. Back in the day, back in my day, BT9, Ravenmon was crazy, and now look at it. You know how mighty. I'm trying to remember that quote from Knuckles, that random one that goes around on the internet. I can't remember it. Someone put it in the comments if you can remember it. I know, and I think it's "You who were once so proud, go now and never return." I think that's what it is. Someone let me know who knows the internet speak. Numamon. Huh? I mean, obviously it's nowhere near as good as it was when it was tier 1, but Rogue tier? Wow, power creep is amazing. Chimeramon, this one is, I think, such a pain in the ass for people to build. You know, once it gets the ball rolling, I'm changing my terminology slightly. It can be really good, but it's getting there, and it's having that trash filled up. Mirage, again, mighty have fallen. I think without the BT11 Mirage Agubond, this has just fallen off massively. I would genuinely be tempted to try and build a Mirage build for Jank Tank. I am not even going to kid you. I don't want to do it because I feel like it's you know, it would be against it, but at the same time, can this deck still do really well? We'll have to see. Yellow Armor has ended up in Rogue tier, and this will make the guy who I talked about with in the Mastimon comments very happy that it has ended up in Rogue tier. I'll completely put my hands up. You know, yeah, results-wise, I think it's probably there. I probably still had bias from previous formats. I'll completely put my hand up to that. I think when I actually did my votes, I did put it into... Did I put it into tier 2? Did I actually put it into tier 2? Yeah, I ended up putting in tier 2, not 1.5, which I think is what I originally did in the video. Obviously, I had to kind of redo my votes when the poll was actually released. But yeah, I can agree with this being in Rogue tier, and the people have spoken. And then Medusamon. I could play Medusamon in Jank Tank, guys. Medusamon is nuts. I mean, this again is a deck that's very glass cannon. It does a lot of damage very quickly in some cases, but you know, it is what it is. That is in Rogue tier, just about. And then we move on to the real meat and potatoes. The single biggest tier, formally, is Jank tier. Which actually kind of spurred us something, because we actually did a poll to see whether or not we should just do the Jank tier decks now, because this tier is now so big. But we still, 6 votes to 5, it was so close in our group, have decided ultimately to do the Rogue tier, Jank tier split still for Jank Tank. And if you guys wanted to see that differently and would prefer us to just do Jank tier, then do let us know. Obviously, by the time you guys are watching this, we'll have already be filming Jank Tank 10, or have filmed it. But you know, let us know if you do want us to switch to Jank tier. I myself, I voted for keeping Rogue tier in, but only until the end of this year, and then revert to Jank tier only next year, just because the previous Jank Tanks this year, of which there have only been 2 of them, we need to try and ramp up our numbers, were Rogue tier, you know, did include Rogue tier decks essentially, and you know, one of those winners, which I've kept leaving on the poll because I keep forgetting of it, is still in Rogue tier, so there is that. Anyways, let's blitz through these because I've got to go back to work in a bit. We got Barbamon X. Barbamon X is shit, and clearly people think so. 96% of the logged viewers put it into Jank tier. Clearly terrible. Bagra Army, also clearly terrible. Could be a lot better in EX10, but right now, nah. Argomon, also awful. And Goromon, bad, not as bad. 1% into tier 1. Anyways, Grey Knights, yeah, shit. Has been since it first came out. Fortitude Tribal, not really a deck. It's just a bunch of things you put together that have Fortitude. I have tried to make it work. I can't. I just can't. Jumbo, I love Jumbo. Jumbo is so good. You can mix it with stuff. I actually run it with the Armadillomon engine. So the Shakuramon stuff, which has also ended up in Jank Tier, so completely legal for us to play in Jank Tank. And I did play it in the previous Jank Tank. I came very close to winning, but not quite. But Jumbo is awesome. I love Jumbo, but yeah, Jank. Mamimon, also Jank. I mean, it's never done anything. Ravenmon, terrible. Bandai are far too scared of hand control, in comparison to other games, and which is a blessing and a curse, at least for Ravenmon. The Trains deck, the goats that put it into Tier 2, salute you. But yeah, Jag Tier, this is just a bad Machine Dramon, let's be honest. 4 Great Dragons, kind of funny seeing these are literal gods. Awful. They've not received any supports properly since EX3, just random cards every now and again. Jellymon has ended up in Jank Tier, which is kind of crazy. I know Dane absolutely cooked with this, and I'm hoping he plays it in Jank Tank 10, because he plays a really interesting build for this. Mythosmon, obviously we recently got the EX10 support revealed, and I think that's really going to uplift the deck, but as of right now, yeah, it's Jank Tier. Absolutely agree with people here. Ogub Bond, very split on the votes here, but most people put it into Jank Tier. I personally, I think, put it into Rogue Tier. I can't be asked to check my results again. But Ogub Bond is another deck I was tempted to build for Jank Tank 10 because it was the first deck I ever played in Jank Tank. So it'd be really nice to kind of go full circle and play it again. But at the same time, I've got other things I would like to play. So it's like, what do I do? I really should have run a poll or something on got you guys to decide for me. But I think I've made my choice now. Marsmon, previous Jank Tank champion, still in Jank Tier. Yeah, it's, not really done much, has it? Green Gacha, I love this deck as well. Can be really wacky, but wacky equals janky. Reaper, yeah, it's bad. It's just awful. Skull Hybrid, of course, is kind of another previous winner of Jank Tank. My two winners, Marsmon and Skull Hybrid. This I think can still be really cool to play, but obviously it's bad. It's very bad. Yellow Lord Knight. There's a different Lord Knight in each of these tiers, which is really humorous to me. Yellow Lord Knight can still do some really cool things like playing out Valkyremon Ace, but obviously not that great. Titamon, very cool. You could... something I probably should have put in this was the DM version 4 list that uses the Titamon Ace. This is classic Titamon though, so I can see why this is here. Possibly very split votes. Maybe I need to also say that these are purely for, based on meta viability and stuff like that. But Black Hybrid can still do Reaper blocker shenanigans even without Shoto, but not particularly well. Justimon, I know a lot of people love Justimon, and with the right engine, I think it's really good. With its own engine, not so much. I've seen a lot of people, I think, using DM engines for this now, and those can be pretty potent, but in terms of like classic Justimon, yeah, that is right where it belongs. Dinusmon self-immolates itself too much, just like Katorismon does, but has not less ways of recovering itself, but less efficient ways of recovering itself, I suppose. Rosemon is just bad Bloomlord, and Bloomlord has ended up in Rogue Tier, so obviously Rosemon had to end up in Jank. Royal Base could have been so much, but it's just rubbish. Beelstar Loop, I know this deck can go really hard, but in this current format, no. Chess with the new puppet support, could this be really good? A lot of people did put it into Rogue Tier because of that, but most people put it in Jank Tier, so there it is. Magna Hybrid is in Jank Tier, along with, I'll talk about it now as well, Emperor Hybrid. What the fuck? How have these ended up in Jank Tier? I suppose they require so much more setup than a lot of these other decks, so I can see it, but holy crap, that's kind of crazy. Shakuramon we kind of already touched upon, and Source Strip, which can use the Shakuramon engine. So the Vikemon stuff has ended up in Jank Tier. This can be really annoying to go up against, but not that bad. Same as Shakuramon, can be really annoying to go up against, but it just fizzles out sometimes. There's Boltmon. Boltmon is one of the new BT22 decks, and yeah, it's kind of hard to get this deck in a good place. It's really strong in the early game, but the late game is where it struggles. And in a meta of just protection upon protection upon protection, it can't always clear boards with its big assembly play. I really love it, and it is another deck I'm considering playing for Jank Tank 10. I do adore it. So, but I can see why it's ended up in Jank tier. Dark Masters, yep, I can see why this is in Jank tier. Obviously was the absolute scourge of BT15 to the point that Bandai had to kill the deck entirely after only 2 weeks. But yeah, it's definitely in the janky tier. Agubond joins Ogub Bond in Jank tier. Agubond as a card is interesting because I think in a Agubond deck, Agubond Ace is kind of worse than Agubond Ace. In other decks, like Melga, Agubond Ace is better than Agubond Ace is in, say, Greymon. But it's very situational, so I can see why Agubond's ended up in Jank tier. Heavy Metal Dramon, a bit of more of a split here, but most people put it into Jank tier. I can see why it just empties its own hand far too much. So not great. Sukman has ended up in Jank tier after being in Rogue for God knows how long. Yeah, it's a little bit slow. Doesn't do great. 4 Sovereigns. Wow. That has ended up in Jank tier. Couldn't see that coming. Yes, it's not had results in ages. Yes, it's kind of slow. But, this was a fairly potent deck. At certain times. And to see it in Jank tier is kind of crazy, not going to lie. Shakabon. Yeah, I can see this being in there. It's kind of almost a worse 4 Sovereigns, honestly. But yeah, so I can see that being there. Eosmon, this is a very obnoxious deck to go up against, but it is kind of bad too. Leomon has ended up in Jank tier. I do like Leomon. It used to be a real gatekeeper, but clearly not anymore. Pulsemon, I love Pulsemon. Pulsemon is so good to play, not in terms of meta, respect currently. I think this deck can push much further than people think. Personally, I would have called it Rogue tier, but Jank tier is where it is. Sylphimon is a really strong engine. I mean, it could go up into bloody Valderam, which is nuts. In Jank Tank specifically, can't play Medieval Gallantmon. Obviously, in terms of normal meta, it can. Yeah, I think, it's ended up there. Then Millith can do some crazy things, but way too slow nowadays. Jesus. Ice Snow almost ended up in Rogue tier. 1 vote between them, but Jank tier it has settled like snow. And apparently, because it's in Jank tier, I guess it's Yellow Snow. Mervaloop. I know lots of people love this deck. Again, Men of Culture love it. Yeah, it's Jank tier. It's Jank tier. What a sad day for Merva players. Seekers has ended up in Jank tier. Now, this kind of surprises me. I guess a very even split on these. I think this has got a fairly good engine. I've tested it before. I was going to build it IRL at one point. Never got round to it. Still got all the random pieces in my binder. Yeah, surprised to see it in Jank tier, but there it is. Yellow Hybrid is in Jank tier. Again, 1 vote between them. This deck can do some crazy things, but unless you're playing it, as an Ancient Guard deck, it's not that great. Setcon has ended up in Jank tier. A couple of people voted it tier 1 and tier 2. Try to keep it out of here, but nah, it's here. It's illegal. And then there's one deck I'm going to leave last. 3 Musketeers has ended up in Jank tier. That's kind of nuts. Can do a lot of board control. Really good against decks that rely on Tamers. I found. And yeah, great. And then the last deck has ended up in Jank tier. Fenrir. And I wonder if this is because I used these images specifically, because it's kind of gone back to the older BT14 playstyle now. I wonder if I'd put the BT14 image on there and just said Fenrir rather than Fenrir OTK. I wonder if it would have placed higher. But this is where it is. Fenrir is jank legal. That's not something I ever thought I'd say. And that is the full tier list, guys, as voted on by lots of people. Not all of them logged in, but lots of people nonetheless. Thank you to everyone who did participate. This is so cool to see so many people taking part in these votes. Frigging love it. can't wait to do the next one in the BT23 EX10 meta. You know, and yeah, what a crazy list. I mean, Jank Tank is going to be freaking mad, and it'll be interesting to see if this tier list is any different by the time the ban list comes out. I mean, how will some of these fall down come the next time we do this, after a ban list and after, you know, new cards come out? Always really interesting to see, to get this kind of output. And again, like I said at the beginning of the video, if you do want me to try and do a bit more proper metadata analysis for my initial votes video, then let me know. And I will do my best to facilitate that. Like I say, I'm not the best when it comes to data analysis, but I could learn for this channel. I could do it. I could do it. Anyways, my voice is husky as anything. I need to go back to work. Like, subscribe, ding that notification bell, and I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and we will see you again. Thank you again to our one channel member, Malachite749, again, for your support as one of the DU Destined, and thank you again to everyone who is watching. Until next time, keep it digital.